It's time.
We know that free agency doesn't win fantasy football leagues. We know that. But the way that you react to them can absolutely lose it for you. Obviously, we see the same cycle. As I said last week, player signs somewhere, the hype explodes, ADP skyrockets, but the fantasy production barely changes. And that's what the trap is. Welcome in to the Front Office Podcast. I'm your host, Pistols. We are here this week to break down the NFC East. Last week we did the AFC East. We're going to stick right along with our division series here on the channel. You can check out that video over on YouTube at Pistols Live HQ. Check that out. Give it a like, give it a follow, give it a subscription. We'll see you over on YouTube as well. Today, as I said, we are going to break down the NFC East. The NFC East is one of those divisions that have really quietly become pretty competitive. We saw the Eagles win the Super Bowl a couple years ago, actually. We see Dallas in the mix every year. We saw the Commanders with a rookie quarterback when Jaden Daniels was drafted make it to the NFC Championship. Ultimately, they got beat by the Eagles, but they made it there. And we saw the Giants, make a couple playoff runs, but nothing really since. But now that they got a new head coach and new pieces to the puzzle there with Jackson Dart and Cam Scatterbo, they got some really nice pieces into the mix here. Every team in that division is built around their quarterback. They brought in guys. They are helping their young quarterbacks out. These teams are trying to maintain their championship contention. Like I said, we saw the Eagles win the Super Bowl a couple years ago. The Commanders are rebuilding around young quarterbacks and their young quarterback and Jane Daniels, and the Giants are now rebuilding their team as well with a young quarterback and Jackson Dart, who we saw play really well at the end of the season there. He was a rookie coming in and still he played great. Especially fantasy managers were probably pretty happy to take a shot on him late in drafts and saw his points really kind of take off. All that context matters when we're talking about fantasy football and how they're building their teams and what's going on those offenses. Let's get right into it here. We're going to start with the Dallas Cowboys. Okay, Dallas Cowboys, historically have been America's team. I think that narrative has shifted a little bit. They're not America's team anymore. There's teams out there that they consider America's team now. But the biggest thing with them is we saw them franchise tag George Pickens. Dallas operates as a very pass heavy offense. We see them throw the ball a ton. Dak Prescott has been on pace for 5,000 plus yards each of the last however many seasons. Injuries kind of derailed him early on in the season, which kind of led them to a not so great run recently. But the biggest thing is, they have some nice depth at wide receiver. CeeDee Lamb, George Pickens, those are two really, really good running backs, and their volume and production is not going to change. In my opinion, they don't really need to add to their receiving core. They have Javonte Williams, running back, who played really well. Probably could use a backup running back there, but they're set at quarterback. These are four teams that are pretty set in their ways. We see Dallas is one of the pass heavier offenses in that division. With Dak Prescott, he has the ability to run, but he doesn't really utilize that too much. And we know times that we have seen him run, we've seen him get injured. So, with the Dallas Cowboys, you should have no problem drafting CeeDee Lamb or George Pickens. Both of these guys superstar wide receivers in the league. We saw George Pickens kind of take over the number one receiving role, which kind of stunk for CeeDee Lamb owners last year. But for the most part, with that pass heavy attack that they have, they're very pass centric. Both of those guys are going to get their targets. We're going to see CeeDee Lamb, 100 plus targets. We're going to see George Pickens 100 plus targets. It's just the nature of the game there. That's how they play football. They have a quarterback with a really good arm and can make those throws any which way you please. They have a really good tight end in Jake Ferguson. They utilize him a lot, especially in the red zone. They like him down there in that zone once they get into that 20-yard range. Now, Dallas Cowboys are a team that had some bad luck, like I said, with the injuries that happened. And, we saw CeeDee Lamb miss a couple games, and we saw Dak be Dak. It's just, I have no problem drafting anybody from the Dallas Cowboys. It's just the way it goes. Like I said, they're not really a team that's probably going to be too. They're not going to be too crazy to sign people in the offseason. It's just the way it is. You should be very happy with either of those receivers as your wide receiver one. I know some people last year had both of them on their team and were very happy with that. And it's just one of those things. And Dallas is going to be Dallas. They're going to throw the ball a ton. They're going to, you're going to watch the fantasy points rack up for the receivers. Now, as far as the running back goes, Javonte Williams, we definitely saw him kind of come onto the scene. We weren't really sure how they were going to utilize him. They really like him. I think he's a very good running back. I wouldn't say he's elite, but he was very viable in that offense, especially when you can get the play action going. But yeah, Dallas is a pretty solid team on paper. It'll be interesting to see what they do in free agency. I know free agency kicks off by the time this episode comes out. It'll be the next day. So we're seeing free agency kick off here soon, and this is all speculation. I don't see Dallas being very aggressive in free agency. Like I said, they have their pieces set. They do need to. I think they do need to make a restructure with Dak Prescott, who's on their books for like $60 million this year, which is just insane. But I say it all the time: volume drives fantasy production, and with the volume that those wide receivers get, you're going to see a ton of points come their way between the two of them. Dallas is just pretty solid. I've never had an issue drafting Dak Prescott late in drafts. I'm not very aggressive on quarterbacks in the first few rounds like a lot of people are. You'll see them take Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts and guys like that early in drafts to where you might be left with Dak Prescott in the 10th or 11th round. I'm perfectly fine with that, especially if he starts hot and has another season where he's on pace for 5,000 plus yards. That's the offense that we like to see from Dallas, and that volume is going to turn into fantasy points for the wide receivers. George Pickens and CeeDee Lamb are going to get the bulk of it. And we're just going to see points galore. Next up on the list, we got the Philadelphia Eagles. This is a team that really struggled to find an identity last season. They do have a pretty balanced offense, in my opinion. The Eagles, they really do like to run everybody hates the tush push, but it's one of their most effective plays, and it's hard to stop. Teams did a pretty good job of honing in on it last season, which I think was where we saw them kind of struggle with their identity. They have two really good wide receivers in A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. We don't know the future of A.J. Brown. We know that the Eagles, there's speculation that they could be trading him. It'll be interesting to see if there is actually a trade that happens for A.J. Brown. We may see it before free agency starts in a couple days, or we might see it once free agency opens up. It'll be one of those things to definitely look out for, and how that's going to change the perspective on draft day. I think Devonta Smith could be a very, very good option as a wide receiver one there. But again, they kind of struggled to find that identity. They didn't really know what to do. We saw Saquon Barkley's production really take a hit after the 2,000-yard season, which a lot of people expected him to not repeat that. But I don't think they expected him to, only rush for, 6 or 7 touchdowns or whatever he had. We see Jalen Hurts take a lot of those touchdowns in the red zone, so that really kind of hurts Saquon's value. Might be a hot take, but I don't think Saquon Barkley is first round worthy anymore. A lot of the times we see him drafted, I've seen him 1 overall, I've seen him 5 overall, I've seen him taken with the 10th pick overall. But it all depends on this year if they really kind of hone in on their identity and figure out what kind of team that they want to be. It's very frustrating as fantasy managers and fantasy owners. If you have AJ Brown or Devonta Smith or Saquon Barkley, Jalen Hurts, all these guys, Dallas Goedert, we saw with an uptick in touchdowns in the red zone, but we saw a massive decrease in yardage for the tight end this year. They have a really good offense as well. A couple key things. We really need to see some offensive line depth from them to kind of get back to that run heavy offense that they typically like to run in Philadelphia. As far as I'm concerned, AJ Brown, Devonta Smith, Jalen Hurts, like these guys are wide receiver ones, but borderline wide receiver twos at this point because of that kind of lost identity that they had mid-season last year. And ultimately they won games still, but it's really hard to focus on that when you have a guy like AJ Brown who's been very public about, yes, they won the game, but his production wasn't there. Now I know these guys are pro athletes and they hold themselves to higher standards than normal. AJ Brown's a winner. He came from the Tennessee Titans a few years back, and a team that went to the playoffs with Mike Vrabel. Ultimately, they let Mike Vrabel go. He went to the Patriots, went to the Super Bowl, yada yada. But with a guy like AJ Brown, when he's in the locker room and he's talking to the press and he's got this emphasis on I want the ball. It makes it really hard to focus on the wins that they actually did have. And again, they went to the NFC Championship, ultimately lost to the Seahawks. But for the most part, we see a team that won the Super Bowl, made it to the NFC Championship the next year, and they're just fighting to maintain that. They're fighting to maintain that championship caliber team that they have. Philadelphia is a very good team in the NFC. And especially makes it tough for the division. This could be a year where we see all 4 teams in the NFC East make it to the playoffs. It's not uncommon that you see teams like that just dominate. And we saw it with the NFC West with the Seahawks, minus the Cardinals, but multiple teams from the same division will make the playoffs, and this could be the year for the NFC East. Now, again, I'm going to say it a lot. Fantasy points and production are driven by volume. The volume is not there. The points are not going to be there. So with Saquon Barkley's situation, and if everybody's expecting him to rush for 2,000 yards every single year, they're going to be very disappointed. He was a guy that I drafted on a lot of my teams, and I was very disappointed in mid-season when the touchdowns weren't there. He was sub 10 fantasy points for like 3 or 4 games in a row. And it was, of course, those are important games in the middle of the season when you're making a playoff push. So not having that touchdown production turned into the fantasy points that you need to win your matchups week in and week out. You become a little salty. You become, you become a draft hater of these guys. So Saquon Barkley is like I said, hot take, but not first round pick anymore. I have no problem taking him in the second, uh, either late or early or however it ends up falling. But there's a couple guys that really took over that number one, that first round draft pick. Guys like Jahmyr Gibbs and Bijan Robinson, who are your number one running backs. But the Eagles really need to find an identity. And I think they did find it a little bit at the end of the season there, which is, like I said, why they made it to the NFC Championship. But I think they needed to find it a little earlier in order to dominate that. And it's just going to be hard to picture the playoffs without the Philadelphia Eagles in it. So I don't really think they need to add anything in free agency. This is a division again that's pretty competitive, and it has been for the last couple years now. Philadelphia they have those guys, and as long as those guys can produce and they can figure out that identity, whether they want to be a passing team, a running team, or a balanced team that has a good mixture of both. I think they win a lot of games and they dominate a lot of games when Saquon Barkley touches the ball 25 plus times. They win a lot of games and they become incredibly hard to beat when AJ Brown gets 10 plus targets and Devonta Smith gets 5 plus targets. And they just need to figure out that balance and find that true identity that they lacked last season. Moving on from the Eagles, we're going to get into the Giants. Again, with fantasy football, is this is where fantasy managers really make a mistake. They see free agent signing and they immediately just change their rankings. Rankings will always change, but just because of the headlines doesn't really mean the rankings should change all that much. They should move because the opportunity moves. When the opportunity changes, that's the one thing that you have to ask yourself is, did the opportunity change or did just the narrative change? Meaning just the headline on a team signing and whatever the case may be. Again, a team that probably isn't going to add too much firepower on offense unless they get a couple of offensive linemen in there. But other than that, Philadelphia Eagles, I can see them in the playoffs again. As I said, moving on to the New York Giants. Another team that's really kind of looking for an identity. We did see them fire Brian Daboll mid-season, which is always crazy to me when a team lets a coach go mid-season. But they're still shaping their offense really with Jackson Dart going into year 2. Cam Scadaboo had that ankle injury that kind of derailed his incredible rookie campaign that he had. Now that he's coming back, now that Jackson Dart is going into year 2, has that first year under his belt, you're going to see Malik Neighbors coming back, who was one of the top wide receivers in the league. It was really unfortunate for him, and I'm sure fantasy managers were very, very disappointed when they saw him get injured week 1. Now, the good thing is that week 1 really was kind of best case scenario for an injury like that. That allows him to go through the healing process and come back for week 1. He should be ready by training camp. So now they do have a couple free agents that are needing to either be re-signed or they're going to have to fill that void with Wan'Dale Robinson, who played very well at kind of the end of the season. We saw Darius Slayton kind of step up a little bit. But again, when you have a new head coach and Jim Harbaugh being there, Jim Harbaugh is typically a very, run heavy run heavy type of coach. We saw it with the move, signing Derrick Henry in Baltimore when he was there before he got let go last in the offseason here. But now the Giants have their head coach in John Harbaugh, and we're going to look to see what they're going to do in the free agent market. Like I said, they have Malik Neighbors coming back, so if they don't re-sign Wan'Dale Robinson, they're going to need to fill that wide receiver 2 role in order for them to really start to compete. John has already come on and said that he wants to really bolster up the running back core that they have. I don't know if they're going to bring Tyrone Tracy or Devin Singletary back, especially with Cam Scadaboo in the mix now, who, like I said, was having a really, really good rookie season until he, injured that ankle and put him out the rest of the season. They have their young quarterback then that's what they need to build around. We saw John Harbaugh have Lamar Jackson and really found some success there. I think he can find some success in New York with Jackson Dart, who played very, very well. A couple rookie mistakes, diving instead of sliding, kind of really cost him a couple games there with minor concussions that he was dealing with in a few of those games because of that. As a rookie, you kind of just, and as a guy that's trying to prove himself right off the bat, he's a guy that they're going to trust and lean on. He can throw the ball. He can run the ball. We know that. We saw him, rush for, 5-6 touchdowns, maybe more. Probably have to look it up. But as long as they can get, a couple veteran receivers in there to kind of guide the young guys that they have. Like Malik Neighbors, this was only year 2 for him. And, with the injury, it kind of put a damper on their offense. And that's why we saw, we saw Jackson Dart come in and we saw Brian Daboll get let go. Again, that identity right now is unknown because there's just not enough tape and not enough film on the guys that they have. But it'll be interesting to see what they do in free agency. They could use a guy like Alec Pierce or Romeo Doubs just to kind of balance out that wide receiver group. We're going to see a ton of volume with Malik Neighbors coming back. Guys that come back from injuries, they especially. This was year 2 for Malik. This will be going into year 3. He's going to want to get back to form. He's going to want to be that guy that takes over and really, really takes control of that offense. We're going to see Jackson Dart, progress forward in his career, and it's going to be really interesting to see what the Giants have in store for us this season. I have no problem drafting Malik Neighbors, especially after the injury. I know a lot of people shy away from guys who were injured, risk of re-injury. And, these guys are NFL athletes and they have the best doctors in the world that do their surgeries and work on them and prepare them for the season. I have no doubt in my mind that Malik Neighbors is going to come back and be the guy that dominates the target share on offense. We're going to see them bolster up the running back core in free agency, as John Harbaugh already said he was going to do. I could see them bringing in a guy that's a little change of pacey, like J.K. Dobbins from Denver, a guy who's pretty decent catching the ball out of the backfield. I don't know if they're going to re-sign him. I don't think they are because I think they really liked RJ Harvey there in Denver. But for the most part, a guy like J.K. Dobbins who has battled some injuries himself when he was in Baltimore and ultimately got injured again when he went to the Chargers and had a pretty decent season in Denver. Again, got hurt, missed some games, and a guy like that could really help them. Obviously, it's crazy to think that Kenneth Walker might end up there. a guy that can really handle the workload of a true number one running back. But again, with Cam Scatterbo coming back, we assume that he's going to be their number one. And I have no problem with drafting Cam Scatterbo again this season. And once they really figure out what their offense is going to look like with a young group of guys. Thank you, Breezy, for the happy birthday wish. I appreciate it. The Giants are just one of those teams that it's a whole lot of unknowns right now. We're really looking to see where the opportunity is going to go. We know that it's going to be in Malik Neighbors' hands. We know that it's going to be in Jackson Dart's hands. As long as those two can get on the same page, they're really only going to have one offseason together since Malik got hurt. They didn't really practice. I mean, of course, they all practice as a team, but you don't build that relationship. When you're the third string quarterback entering the season, you don't play with the ones a lot. So by the time that, now that Jackson Dart's the starter, he's going to have a lot more time in the offseason and come training camp when that kicks off in July. We're really going to see that relationship between Malik Neighbors and Jackson Dart grow. I could see, I could really see the Giants making a push here. Again, they finally found some stability at head coach. I think John Harbaugh is going to be there for a long time. I don't think he's going to get fired anytime soon. It was mostly the Ravens that needed a change. So, of course, it's the head coach that goes first. But yeah, I like to see some good things out of the Giants. Now, I'm not sitting here saying, go draft all the Giants players in the top half of your draft, but definitely some guys to think about to where the opportunity is just gonna grow for them. We saw some really good tight end play from the Giants as well. Again, tight ends are becoming irrelevant in fantasy football, so they're not really on my radar at all. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the offseason with them. And the last team that we talk about in the NFC East is the Washington Commanders. Very young team. We saw them re-sign Terry McLaurin. We saw Jaden Daniels get hurt. McLaurin got hurt as well, so they kind of had the injury bug going around with the Washington Commanders, which ultimately their season was very, very disappointing as far as the standard that we saw when Jaden Daniels was a rookie 2 seasons ago. We saw him lead the Commanders to the NFC Championship in year one. Jaden Daniels is a very good young quarterback, and that's the identity that the Commanders have as well. They have a good young team. Now, we did see, they only signed Deebo Samuel for a year, so he is now a free agent. They extended Terry McLaurin, so they have one solid wide receiver. We're going to see that volume pick up as long as he can stay healthy. We're really going to see some aggressive signings from the Commanders at the wide receiver position. I could see them going after a guy like Mike Evans. I could see them going after a guy like Alec Pierce. They like their big plays. Jaden Daniels has a great arm. A guy like Alec Pierce is probably on their radar. Of course, it comes down to what deal these guys like the best. But as far as with the young roster, these guys have an ability to grow together for a long time, and that's just going to make an offense stronger. Again, I'm gonna beat it like a dead horse and sound like a broken record here, and it's opportunity is going to turn into fantasy points. Where's the opportunity going to be on the Commanders offense? We saw them kind of take a running back by committee approach as well. So they may be looking to bolster the running back depth there. I can see a guy like Kenneth Walker. And now Kenneth Walker, in my opinion, is probably the top free agent running back. So I'm gonna mention him a lot. He's a guy that could really fit on any team and be their number one running back. We saw some good things from Krosky Merritt. I don't know if he is the type of back that has the ability to carry the workload of a full season as the number one running back in rotation. Um, we saw that the young Rodriguez kid, I think it was kind of fit in the mix there. Their starter Austin Eckler got injured early on in the season. They were probably kicking themselves when they traded Brian Robinson to the 49ers after that injury, and they probably could have used him. But, the Commanders have a good young team, and that's really what they're looking for. We're going to look for young guys to join their team that they can grow with the current roster that they have. Getting them on the same page as Jaden Daniels, who's now going into year 3. Hopefully he can stay healthy as well, because he's a guy that has to be on the field for them to win games. Now we saw Deebo Samuel do really well in the absence of Terry McLaurin. But like I said, he's a free agent and probably not going to be there next season. So they're going to be looking to add to the wide receivers for sure. I think they're going to look to add to the running back. We saw Zach Ertz play pretty well there with his injury late. He's also a free agent, probably not going to be re-signed there. Not really too many tight end options out there. Again, just these teams are just not utilizing tight ends like they used to. It's just one of those things that is just becoming irrelevant. But they, like I said, they're a young team. Their roster is young, and they have a ton of talent there, and they're just going to be looking to add guys that can grow with that team together. It's pretty balanced mix in the division of as far as the offensive identities of each of these teams goes. We have some pass heavy teams, like I said, the Dallas Cowboys, some balanced offenses like the Eagles, and then the two developing offenses like the Giants and the Commanders. Without the injuries, those teams are probably pretty solid. But as I said before, free agency shifts the perspective or the perception on how we look at teams and how they want to build their teams and moving forward, and what that means for fantasy is just don't get sucked into the hype of free agency. Yes, we love to see guys get on the move and sign with new teams, but realistically, what it comes down to is, where's the opportunity going to go? Where's it going to be shifted to when a new wide receiver, a new running back, or like I said, most of these teams don't need new quarterbacks. So we probably won't see a crazy quarterback market change anytime soon. But is that volume going to go up? Is there a guaranteed role for these players on these offenses? What is the snap share going to look like for these guys? What are they going to do in the red zone? All these things go into making a decision come draft day. So with these 4 teams in the NFC East, there's some really good pieces there. I have no problem with drafting any of these guys to have on my teams. We're gonna have to wait and see what free agency brings and see who really takes control of free agency and who's aggressive and who's not. Like I said, I don't really see Dallas or Philadelphia becoming super aggressive during free agency. I do see the Giants and the Commanders getting a little bit more aggressive to fill some of those voids that they need, and to really bolster up those offenses and bring guys in that are really just going to have a chance and an opportunity to play. And that's where your fantasy points are going to come from. And I say this a lot too: bad teams produce a ton of fantasy points because they're playing from behind, and they have to do something. They have to, they got to throw the ball to catch up, whether they're down by 21 or whatever it might be. Bad teams produce fantasy points because the opportunity is there for these players to produce and to be a part of an offense. And now all these guys in the NFL, they're pro athletes. They're professionals. They're there for a reason. But when it comes down to it, it's all about the opportunity, and just the way it goes for fantasy football. We love fantasy football around here, and we're going to be evaluating all the divisions and our division series. Episodes are going to go live every Tuesday and Thursday, so be on the lookout for those. We prepare now, we win later. Preparation is the key to winning fantasy football leagues. If you know the mindset and the offensive scheme for these respective offenses, then draft day is going to come super simple for you. I appreciate you guys for watching the NFC East breakdown. Comments, questions, concerns, we're going to post this on YouTube. Again, it's over at Pistols Live HQ. I am Pistols. This is the Front Office Podcast. Thanks for watching.